The last embers of the day were fading fast as the sky over Treep-Rup grew steadily blacker. Treep-Rup was a major settlement on New Savannah, and while it had once owned a human name, it had been renamed by the planet's indigenous inhabitants, a sign of their increasing confidence and independence. The city's wide streets had a certain similarity with central Amsterdam on Earth, if Holland had been hilly and the city free from canals. Certainly the streets were broad enough to happily contain a waterway had it been required. The tall, close-packed buildings perhaps boasted more balconies than its Dutch twin, but otherwise the similarity in architecture was uncanny. It was in the middle of one of these spacious avenues that the TARDIS now materialised. The door swung open, and through it stepped the Doctor and Romana, closely followed by K9. "Treep-Rup, New Savannah," the Doctor offered simply. The TARDIS materialised on the side of a rough earth road which curved gently down towards a sizable fishing port. The Doctor and Romana stepped from the TARDIS into an early autumn night. There was a slight nip in the air, but nothing too unpleasant. "England, 1878, the Doctor said gravely. The TARDIS stood upon a narrow raised walkway, one of three leading to a sizable square city, itself raised above the level of what seemed a surrounding swamp. The Doctor and Romana stood with K9 in front of the blue box, staring at that city. Well, partly at the city. The city was low and flat, built of a near white stone and constructed in broad tiers, rising towards a large central plaza upon its highest level. At the centre of the plaza was a massive basalt column, rising up at least twice as high as the city itself. It was over 20 metres in diameter and covered in strange script and imagery, both of which seemed to twist the eye and unsettle the stomach, uncanny and disturbing to the core. This weirdly decorated monolith dwarfed everything else in sight. Well, almost everything. Woof! Okay. There is a squirrel on the roof right now. She began. The woman frowned at Romana and the Doctor a little. The woman frowned at Romana and the Doctor a little suspiciously, but lowered her weapon to chest height. The Doctor shook his head wearily. "I fear if that was so, it would be a best-case scenario. No, I'm afraid something far darker and more serious is... No, I'm afraid something far darker and more serious is they're too quick. No, I'm afraid something darker and far... No, I'm afraid something far darker and more sinister is at work here." The TARDIS stood upon a narrow raised walkway, one of three leading... You can't even get through one sentence. That's what editing's for. The TARDIS stood upon a narrow raised... And it was certainly in the... And it was certainly in the direction of that monument which the creature, you moron. And it was certainly in the direction of that monument which, on the creature's upper body, sat two jewel-like multifaceted eyes. These looked like fist-sized rubies. These looked like fist-sized rubies. fist-sized. These looked like fist-sized rubies. And stood out starkly against the Nosner's scaly grey hide. As they set out, the doctor leaned down to K9. K9, when we reach the site of the source event, complete your scans as quickly as possible. He whispered behind his hand. Of course he did. K9, when we reach the site of the source event, complete your scans as quickly as possible. He whispered behind his hand.